In 1996, Susan Sontag famously proclaimed cinephilia dead and saw the cinema together with it. But almost 30 years later, we still watch and love cinema.
I feel like I'm at church, my church.
I couldn't help but wonder, is modern cinephilia actually dead and left us behind with a new archetype of cinephile, the film bro?
We're film bros. Of course we think Django Unchained is peak Tarantino. We're film bros. Of course Fight Club has the best twist ending of all time.
Found online in spaces like Letterboxd reviews, as well as film festivals dedicated to Tarantino, other film bros are merely representation of the current state of a cinephile community and post-effects of the commodification of film, as well as film being perceived as an as distraction for fast dopamine-seeking brain and not form of art. In this video, we'll talk about love. Love for the cinema, of course. And how can we still find place for love for the cinema in our hearts among the perceived snobbery of cinephile and pseudo-intellectualism of a film bro? While we talk about film, I would like to mention also that on this channel I talk about film and fashion and cultural trends. So if you haven't done so, please don't forget to like and subscribe. And also down below in the subscription, you will find a free month for streaming platform Mubi, which only streams independent cinema. Probably the first and foremost question to answer in the video about cinephilia is who are actually the cinephiles and what is cinephilia? If I simply describe it as a love for cinema, it would not encompass the whole complex range of feelings people feel towards cinema. Essentially, cinephilia is about engaging with and discussing cinema. While reading about it, I came across very interesting terms like loss of memory or aestheticization of film, or the very specific kind of love that cinema inspired. In her essay, Decay of Cinema, Susan Sontag describes love like this. The love that cinema inspired, however, was special. It was born of the conviction that cinema was an art unlike any other, quintessentially modern, distinctively accessible, poetic and mysterious, erotic and moral, all at the same time. Cinema had apostles. It was like religion. Cinema was a crusade. For cinephiles, the movies encapsulated every scene.
So it's a show?
It's a lifestyle.
It's a religion.
If you take a lot of people who are really obsessed about something and treat it like religion, you get the film bros, right? Well, maybe I'm getting a bit ahead of myself, because cinephilia is not really a new concept. There are three identifiable waves of cinephilia, and how we know it more or less appeared in the 1960s in France, among the Parisian bohemian community of young intellectuals and students. I would call it the OG cinephilia. Many of the cinephiles back then were also film critics, and they were writing for a very popular film journal, Cahiers de Cinéma. They were also going to this lovely place called Cinématique, where I also visited as I was in Paris. Back to the 1960s wave, most of these cinephile critics became filmmakers themselves, which led to the birth of the Nouvelle Vague, or French New Wave movement. Often when more modern cinephiles romanticize the cinephilia, that is usually meant to this era. The second wave is defined by the rise and popularity of DVDs. Something that Sontag described as a loss of cinema charm likely refers to the fact that everyone would just watch films at home instead of going to the cinema. And the third wave of cinephilia, which came together with the rise of the streaming services, is defined by us being very mobile and watching movies from anywhere, anytime. The utopian world where we should have been living by now, that was promised by streaming services, simply does not exist, as first of all, the choice of the libraries is very finite. Second, any movies can be taken away anywhere, causing pretty much ownership anxiety. And third, library curation is very strategically done by those same corporations in their own interest to further commodify film or produce films that they can commodify and place on those platforms.
And every move they make is the result of market research and a corporate master plan.
For example, I tried to watch the Pulp Fiction by Tarantino or Color of Pomegranate by Sergei Parajanov. And of course, Pulp Fiction is available on 5-6 streaming services, and the other one is only available like nowhere or maybe on Mubi. This basically results in streaming services only pushing their own agenda in a certain kind of movie towards the cinephiles, as well as questions the role of democratization of cinephilia, because who can pay for several subscription services at the same time? This level of control of streaming platform over their movies libraries can be compared to the classic Hollywood system, when Hollywood studios would force the cinemas to take packages of films without the choice of having individual movies, before government has intervened and called it what it was, unlawful manipulation of distribution. I would say this is exactly where the commodification of film has a big effect on the cinephilia itself. One can say that there was always a conflict between cinema as an industry and cinema as an art form. But as the cinema production costs have risen in the 1980s, that caused globalization, hyper-industrialization of film in the 1990s. It led to decline of film as a form of art and intellectual edification that Sontag then dramatically describes as a death of cinephilia. In an article poster of Art and Lost Tradition of Cinephilia, author from Armenia argues that by keeping film production local, there's local markets that were resisting this hyper-corporatization and industrialization of film before the 1990s. They actually managed to keep film as a form of cultural exchange. There is a question what kind of cinephile the current environment can actually produce, because we live in a world where not only the streaming platforms are not allowing to have users more wide and conscious choice of film, but it's also hard to imagine for the local cinema industry, like Armenia, for example, to achieve the same effect as Sergei Parajanov Color of Pomegranates did in the 1970s. I'm not saying that the local markets are not producing great films anymore. Of course they are. Major issue is not only the lack of the investment in local industries, but also like a cultural or mind shift where we don't see the film as a crucial cultural exchange, but rather as a commodity that can be consumed and forgotten. It's almost unsurprising, one can say, that in the current conditions of movies made for profit and streaming services controlling the environment and the movies that they produce, that the new kind of cinephile would emerge on this stage, the film bro.
We're film bros. Of course we don't watch any movies from the 1950s besides 12 Angry Men. We're film bros. Of course we couldn't name any female directors before Greta Gerwig.
If you want to be identified with the most known version of film bro, you should probably be watching films of Nolan, Tarantino, Scorsese, or something like Pulp Fiction, Taxi Driver, or Citizen Kane. But I was thinking, if you're into film, aren't those kind of by default the movies that a lot of people watching before becoming cinephile? And also, just to be clear, watching Nolan's movie or Scorsese's movie or Taxi Driver doesn't necessarily make you a film bro.
Has he dressed up as Patrick Bateman for Halloween before? If he has, just forget about it. That man does not care why American Psycho was written and who it was written by.
What can, however, get you the name of the film bro, like in mainly American male directors, which produce movies with a lot of violence and glorify the male loner character, like American Psycho or Taxi Driver. But also, it is misinterpreting a lot of meaning of that same movies, not really understanding them, and starting online discourse. Usually film bros don't listen to other people's opinions and treat their opinion as the ultimate truth, which basically denies the whole idea that art can be perceived in many different ways. However, the stereotype of film bros has evolved. Now, there is different stages of evolution of a film bro, and a new kind of film bro is rather pop contrarian and not following big American directors.
The movie? It's called Dose. Yeah, so the movie was made by 5 Estonian construction workers, and it's basically about the Soviet control over 1940s Estonia. And it's a really cool piece, something that you don't see every day.
So I found this Reddit post online, which lists the stages of the film bro progression. So first would be Nolan and Tarantino, the basic film bros. Second stage being Scorsese and Kubrick, a bit evolved film bros. Third stage is Wong Kar-wai and Park Chan-wook. Fourth stage is Tarkovsky and Bergman. Isn't this progression a normal progression of getting into any film at all? Like when you start from the known and get into the nuances of it?
And now back to Sick Sad World.
By blaming the film bros in gatekeeping the cinema and othering them for their choices of certain directors, aren't we also gatekeeping? In In my previous video where I talk about anti-intellectualism and independent cinema, some of you mentioned the problem with this modern cinephilia is that perceived sense of elitism, pretentiousness, and snobbery. The snobbery of cinephiles is not new at all. And already in the 60s, it was considered a target of derision because of its implied cosmopolitan snobbery. Cinephiles would often be determined by the various form of privilege, especially related to the geographical or financial mobility. Therefore, this idea of cinephile being bourgeois or elitist have been there for a very long time and probably was more true in the past than it is now. Cosmopolitan snobbery of a cinephile right now is only perceived, as we still do have access to the streaming platforms. Even if it's very curated library, it's still one. What is real, however, is imposed sense of intellectual dominance that the stereotype of the film bro possesses, judging just for a taste, arguing without listening, or implying that their opinion is the only true one. It is what is the heart of the same film bro is problematic, enjoying something without asking why this brings enjoyment or what's creating enjoyment, going for controversial by the cost of the open discussion. And it's just this constant state of existing in a cognitive dissonance, where there is just the status quo that never requires any self-reflection or growth. I would encourage to think in nuance, however annoying it might be for some people. We can all love cinema by loving different types of film. One should not be considered less of a cinephile if they're watching Citizen Kane or Tarkovsky or Tarantino movie. This behavior just perpetuates perceived pretentiousness, snobbery, or elitism and makes people feel less like joining the community of cinephiles because of the fear of being judged. Jean-Luc Godard famously said, "It's not where you take things from, it's where you take them to."